Hi, I'm Melissa Ray of Thrive Beauty Services. I provide transformational beauty services in salon, at home, on site, and at your convenience. I'm proud to be sponsoring Get Conscious Now.
Hello everyone, I'm Patricia and welcome to Get Conscious Now. Really wonderful that you've tuned in today, and I also want to acknowledge our studio audience today. We have a full house. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your energy. So today we have a very special guest who is going to take us in a very, very deep dive into our spiritual awareness. Before you meet him, however, I want to introduce my co-host and friend, Stu Zimmerman. Stu, do you have some words of welcome for our people?
Absolutely. Welcome to the shallow end of consciousness here. No, actually, welcome everybody. And we're talking about Get Conscious Now, which on a profound level is nothing outside of us to get. So it's more of a be conscious now. And if you've missed any of our shows, and you might have missed one or two, please come to our Facebook page or to our YouTube channel. For Get Conscious Now, you'll find us. We've had Deepak Chopra, Michael Beckwith, Barbara DeAngelis, a handful of other amazing beings who can teach us and guide us how to bring forward thinking into at least one aspect of everyday life. And thank you for joining us. I'm excited as well for today's show. So Patricia, let's let the festivities begin.
All right, great. So I've been wanting to interview this man since chapter 1 of his first book, I Am the Word. And now I'm having this wonderful opportunity to interview him and for you to meet him. His name is Paul Selig, and he is the author of I Am the Word and several subsequent books, which are also channeled texts. Now, like many of you, if you're watching the show, and certainly people in the audience today, I've done decades, we're talking 4 decades really, of spiritual work, including many bodies of work that have been channeled, Course in Miracles and the Abraham Hicks work, and oh my goodness, Lazarus, Bashar, Ramtha going all the way back to the 80s, and then Jane Roberts also in the early years of channeling. So I would have to say, in all honesty and humility, and maybe I just wasn't ready until now, but this is the most profound body of channeled work that I have ever encountered. I felt it immediately. The book was introduced to me by Stu on my 70th birthday, and he said, Patricia, you need to get this book. And I heard it, but I felt it in my body. And then when I called Paradise Found and asked them if they had it, they had never even heard of it before. So they ordered it, I went to pick it up, and I'm telling you, the reason this book is set apart from any other work that I've done is that it's not just a brilliant intellectual endeavor, and it's beautifully written, and the material is powerful, but not anything maybe you haven't heard before if you're in the consciousness conversation. But the difference with this book is that it's energetic, it's visceral. I can literally feel the difference in my body. There were times when I would read this book, I'd be sitting in bed reading this book, and I would read a passage, and it was so moving, I would just put it on my heart, and I'd lean back, and I literally would feel energy going from the tip of my toes to the top of my head, and then down again for like maybe 20 minutes at a time. I've never had that happen before. So it has been a life changer for me and for many of my students who work with me in the circles I do word circles. And by the way, I'm just going to give myself a plug. I'm starting one on July 5th, if anyone's interested in hearing more about that. So I'd like to give you some highlights of Paul's background before I actually introduce him. He has a very impressive vitae. He was born in New York City, and he attended NYU and Yale University as well. And he was on the faculty of NYU for 25 years, and also on the board of trustees at Goddard College. He has a private practice in New York City as a medium and an empath, and I've had the pleasure of seeing him act in his own capacity at a workshop that I attended in LA on Saturday, and it was remarkable. He's very talented in his ability to really tune into people when he gives a reading. He's been featured on Nightline, and he's considered one of the greatest contributors of channeled work happening today. So I am just thrilled and delighted to welcome Paul Selig to Get Conscious Now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I think we're all curious as to how one becomes a conscious channel, you know, from beings that identify themselves as ascended masters or whatever. When did you know that you had the gift, and how did it all happen?
It was progressive. I didn't know that I could do this. I'm a clairaudient. I was raised something of an atheist, so I didn't really believe that much in any of this stuff. When I was 25, I hit a wall and began looking for a spiritual life, really out of sheer necessity. The first voice I ever heard came after I started praying for the first time in my life, and it told me to get my act together. And I actually listened to the voice, which changed my life. A few months later, I actually had some kind of experience of energy on the evening of this event called the harmonic convergence. I heard people were going to be waking up, and I thought, well, I'd like to be woken up, whatever that means. But it was an experience of energy that left me seeing little lights around people. And I studied a form of energy healing. When I had my hands on people, I found that I could hear things for them. So the channeling that I do now initially began as hearing fragments of information that were very specific to the people that I was working with. And gradually, as I began to trust the information, the station that I was tuning into began to get more clear. And over the course of years, because I ran a little group in my apartment for many years, very quietly, because I had this other academic life, I began to get lectures. And once the lectures started and they began to be transcribed, the work that you know now really fully commenced.
Wow, beautiful. Mm-hmm.
So you just referred to your life in academia, kind of keeping this aspect a little quiet on some level. How was it for you kind of coming out of the closet as a metaphysician, channel, empath, or all of the above?
You know, I had 2 academic appointments. So I was at NYU for 25 years. And when I was young and very excited by all this stuff, I used to teach the kids how to see auras when we ran out of other stuff to do. And then I realized that wasn't what I was being paid for, and it was starting to show up in my evaluation forms. I know how to write a play, and I can see auras and things like that. So I kept it quiet.
Wasn't extra credit or anything?
Wasn't extra credit. I kept a low profile intentionally, and when the first book was published, which was in 2009 or 10, I had a website for clients because I was seeing people, but my name wasn't on it, my photograph wasn't on it. I was very cautious about who found me out. When the book came out and my name ended up on the book, although I don't consider myself the author, I realized I couldn't continue to do that. What actually happened was a television show called The Unexplained called me, and they asked if they could profile me on the show, and they were also interested in my academic affiliation and wanted to film me at NYU. And I said, well, thank you, I'd love to be on your show, but my boss doesn't know about this work, and you can't come to NYU. And I hung up the phone, and then I thought about it for a minute. And you know, one of the things my guides teach is that the action of fear is to claim more fear, and I realized I just made a big choice in fear. And I got back on the phone and I said to my boss, you know, I don't know if you know this about me, but I work as an intuitive, and, you know, the bio channel, blah, blah, blah. And he said, the bio channel, that's A&E, they can come. He didn't hear intuitive, I'm convinced. He didn't hear any of that.
Right, selective listening.
Well, yes, it was really selective. It was a gift. I think he wasn't supposed to hear it because I think he would have said no. Right. And then I had to go to my students, and I had a room full of very sweet college freshmen, you know, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. And I said to the kids, I don't know if you know this about me. And they said, we know. You know, we know. There were YouTube videos up already of me channeling in the living room, and they had checked me out, and they were being very, very polite because I hadn't brought it up, and they were fine.
What were you teaching?
I was teaching playwriting.
Playwriting.
You know, and you know, my fear about what other people would think of me kept me from being public about this work for quite some time.
Sure.
And so far, people have been mostly somewhat interested or somewhat disinterested, and if they think it's crazy, that's who they are anyway, and they're not paying it all that much mind. The other school that I was at, Goddard College, where I'm now on the board, is an old hippie school, and they were much more receptive to the possibility of this, and actually almost sort of encouraged it in some ways. When I first came there, they found out that I did this, and they said, well, why aren't you doing it here? And I thought, oh, I'm in the right school.
Well,
So,
with Goddard as a name and God front and center in the name, you'd figure maybe they'd be open.
it's an interesting place, and I recommend it, yeah.
Leave it to you.
Leave it to me.
God.
I'm sure I wasn't the
Yeah,
first.
Okay. All right, so you analogize your ability using a radio. Could you share about that?
I think we're all radios, and we're always in broadcast, and our broadcast is the consciousness we hold and that we're in emanation with. So my work as a radio is somewhat specific. When I'm channeling, the guides that I work with are broadcasting through me, and my job is to take the dictation, which are the books that you know, and when they lecture and do workshops, they're coming through to speak. There's also the vibration that escorts that, which is usually very palpable for people, which is what Patricia was talking about when she was reading the book. The vibration is very, very present. When I'm working psychically, which is a little bit different, I'm tuning into you. So if I want to hear what's going on with you, you become the station that I tune into, and then I can hear your broadcast and either interpret it or reiterate it. But I think we're all capable of this, and frankly, we're all doing this at different levels. My radio just happens to be refined, and what the guides are doing, which I think is interesting, and they've said this, is that they're attuning the radios that we all are to play a higher broadcast, which is already present, but we've been operating in a very limited way. So these stations are playing the higher music, if you wish, but we have to tune the radios that we are to be able to carry the broadcast.
And sometimes people aren't ready, huh? Is that correct, would you say?
Well, I think it's got to be. I mean, it's choice.
Yeah.
Anyway, the broadcast is there. I mean, there's music I don't like to listen to, so I don't turn the dial there. And I think that is free will, and it should be. I think there are many ways to access spirit or to attune to higher vibrations. The guides that I work with have brought through a system. And this is their system. Are people not always ready? Sure. But you know, when I read half a Seth book when I was a grad student, I think, in between hanging out at the bar. And that was great for me, but I didn't finish the book and I wasn't ready for the teaching, do you understand? And there are people that I think I could give this book to now, including dear friends of mine, who would say, very nice, but not for me. And I would respect that as well.
That's happened with me too, yeah. Yeah, because it's not, it's not going to be all these different paths. Okay.
Yeah, so when you're talking about this higher frequency that you're essentially inviting people to dial into together.
Yes.
It's a feeling, right? Isn't there like a vibrational presence to it that, in my humble experience, it feels really delicious and delightful and spacious.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad you feel it that way. There's an energy that accompanies this work. The guides say that the books are operating on two levels. They're the words on the page, which will give you an intellectual context for the teaching, but that the real teaching is happening in vibration, and really in almost an energetic conversation that you're happening with the text or the guides that are supporting the students of the text. So the vibration, when the guides work, and they do this in workshops too, or just through the books or the attunements, there's a current of energy that can often be felt, or actually multiple different kinds of frequency, or different levels of frequency. I don't know how to describe it as you work with the attunements. That's very palpable. And that's one of the things I actually like about the work, is that people are having these experiences with it that are very personal and also palpable. You know, I always say, I'm not a spiritual teacher and I'm not a guru and I really don't want to be. And I think it's important that you have your own experience of this stuff to be able to validate it. I really don't want people to defer to me. When I was 25 and I went up to my rooftop and I asked to be woken up, I had an experience of energy that for me was very personal to me. I never forgot it. And I may have been hyperventilating for all I know. I will never know what really happened there. But for me, I had a marker in my own experience of wonder and of an experience of something much greater than myself that actually allowed me to go on the journey that I still am today. And I think given how I was raised and the level of skepticism perhaps that I brought to everything, that was very important. So the idea that you can all have your own experience of this work and claim it for yourself, I think validates the work, but more importantly, it puts you back in the responsibility to your own knowing.
And it would be a direct relationship to each of our own individual filters in terms of what we can experience on some level.
You know, it's funny. I used to think things like that. Now I do workshops where there's 100 people there. I did one yesterday at Agape. There was 150, 200 people there. I don't know how many of them were used to feeling energy, but the guides attuned the entire room. And, you know, then I said, well, how many of you felt the energy? And every hand went up. So it's actually available, and most people can feel it. My experience of people that don't feel the energy, and I meet them occasionally at workshops, they're often, I think, some of the most sensitive people who got the message early on that it wasn't very safe to feel. So they're operating with a lot of protection. And once they open up wide. There's a guy that was there yesterday at the workshop, Kevin, and he was at my workshop at Esalen years ago for the first time. And if you know Esalen, you can just take anything you want. You really want to go there to hang out in the hot springs and all that stuff. And he wound up in my workshop because I think the yoga workshop was full or something. He didn't know what he was getting into. And my guides start going off, and this poor man sat there like this, you know, for the whole first evening. But he came back, and he didn't feel anything. And then the final, I think the second to last day of the workshop, he stood up in the middle of the room and he opened up wide, and there was literally cold energy coming off of his body in sheets, and that was all the old blockage releasing from the body. Wow. And the next time I saw him, you know, was at a workshop in LA, and he said, you know, I bought a crate of the books and I'm leaving copies in airports because people should find it themselves, you know. And I thought, well, that's something. Well, it was very sweet. You know, he just gave a bunch of copies to Agape too, which was very touching to me. But what was most interesting is this is the guy who didn't buy this stuff. And he had his own experience of the energy, and that's what changed things. Yeah. You see, it's not about deferring to other people anymore. I really don't think that. I was talking to a friend right before this, sort of with the idea that the age of the guru may be over. The idea that we all get to move into our own authority. And that doesn't mean that there can't be teachers. There are always going to be teachers because people always have things they want to learn. But to claim your own experience of something and to have an experience with the energy that's personal, I think can be a game changer.
You know, I omitted to say that you were channeling internationally and that you were on the faculty of Esalen, right here in California, and Omega Institute and Kripalu Center as well. So that's wonderful. I'd like to ask a question about you as an empath. You know, I haven't had a lot of experience with empaths, but I had an experience in asking you a question on Saturday, a private question, that was mind-boggling because you just nailed it. It was incredible. So would you share about how you're able to tune into people's feelings and assume them?
I don't know how I do it. I can explain what my process is. How it happens, I don't quite understand. So they call me a medium for the living. So I'm not the guy to necessarily get the messages from your great aunt Sarah, you know, who's been gone for a while. But if Sarah's still living and you haven't talked to her in 10 years, I can tune into Sarah. And what I do is really, I just step in. I use the name as a coordinate, usually the full name of the person if I can get it. I can do it with the first name as well. But I step into the person, so I become the person. And I'll often begin to take on their mannerisms or their features, and then I hear. You know, so the first thing that I get is the energetic hit, and usually the physical posture that sort of expresses where they're at. So if you haven't talked to your aunt in 10 years, and I tune into your sister, I tune into her, and the first thing she does is go like that. That means not only does she not want to see you, she's making the effort to blot you out. If she's looking back and forth between you and something else, that means there's still a connection, but she's either being pulled away. So for example, you know, she may care about you, but her spouse is saying no. And then I go into the spouse. You see what I mean? So I'm kind of like an odd human switchboard, but I'm tuning in and stepping in. If you ever saw the movie Ghost and you saw Whoopi Goldberg sort of being taken over, it's kind of like that, except I do the living. People that have crossed will come through. If you have issues with your father who's crossed, I can usually go there, but I would usually get him as he was when he was alive, sometimes right before he crossed. But what I'm looking for is the issue that created the dynamic that's become challenging. So I may go to the situation or the dynamic of criticism or being ignored or being whatever it was in the specific with you and your father in order to support you in moving that energy. So it's very practical, and I like it because you can prove it out. You know, so if I start to look like somebody that I've never seen, or if I start writing with my left hand and I go, is this a lefty? You'll go, and yeah, you know, there's all of this kind of physical confirmation as opposed to the energy that comes through in information.
Sure, so maybe we can make a little bit more of that distinction. So as you work with your guides in terms of what the channeled texts are, how does that differ in your experience and or your process?
Different. Totally different. When I'm channeling, I'm taking dictation. So I don't write the books. I literally sit in a chair, my eyes are closed. Now there are 3 recorders going on at the same time in case one of them fails. About 100 pages. The most recent book was done in front of students at the Esalen Institute. I am literally taking dictation. I whisper the words as they come, and I repeat them in a louder voice again and again and again. If you can imagine reading fortune cookies like one after the other for an entire book, that's what my experience is like, because I'm getting things in phrases. And I don't necessarily know that the whole thing coheres until I see the whole thing transcribed. And then I go, wow, because the deal with the books is they can't be edited. So there's really no editing, and there's now 5 books in print. The first book, once the UPS guy kept buzzing the buzzer when I was trying to channel in the first 3 minutes, and I was cursing so much that the guide said, like, we'll take it up tomorrow. And occasionally, because there's got to be somebody actively listening when I channel, and a woman named Victoria Nelson has been on the phone for most of these books. You know, occasionally in the very first book, the guides would say, do you have any questions? Meaning, do you have any questions on the teaching? And Victoria would ask something that was more personal to her, because she had the opportunity to, and she said, please don't include that. And so we didn't. But everything else has been in the books, and that includes the words that I stumble over, or the repetitions, or whatever, because it's either an authentic transcript of the channeling, or it's a book that somebody prettied up, and then it's not a channel text.
But it's really very well written, and there are very few things in there that would,
think so
would
too.
be omitted by a sharp editor.
You know, I actually feel very fortunate. The editor of the editor, who's the publisher of all of these books, Mitch Horowitz, he's in agreement that the books could not and should not be changed.
Right.
And I do feel that if I'd gone to a different publishing house, or if I mean, Mitch, it's very serendipitous how that relationship came about. But I'm sure somebody would have said, well, this chapter's kind of repetition, or can you change the title to whatever? And the thing is, it's not my book to do that with.
Right.
Once in a while, I can name a chapter. And and the only time that happens is with their approval. And I said, well, you're saying this is about blankety blank blank, is that the title? And I get yes. But for the most part, chapter and verse, it's all of their stuff. I'm completely uninvolved unless I'm questioning the teaching.
So can you tell us how the guides identify themselves? Who are they? And how many are there?
I don't know how many there are. I think there's something in the Book of Mastery where they say, like, there are 9 of us here today, and that's because they were getting impatient because I was fighting the teaching. And they were like, we're all here and we're all trying to work with you. Would you just step out of the way? So that's the only time I've heard a number around them. It's a collective. They call themselves teachers, first and foremost. You know, they're teachers. They're here to teach. They've described themselves as being who we become when we know who we truly are. In the first book, they used the term Ascended Masters, which threw me a little bit, and through Victoria Nelson, who was on the phone a great deal, because it carries some baggage with it from other esoteric teachings. But I've never heard that that is not the case. And in fact, the few that I've seen in, you know, my limited experience with seeing guides clairvoyantly, that is what they come through as. The name that's been given, and it was given finally in the fourth book, which was the Book of Mastery, was the name Melchizedek.
Melchizedek,
Yes.
yeah.
And it's the name that I'd been hearing for years. when they, because occasionally they would announce the name in a workshop and says, we are so-and-so, and I was like, oh, brother. And there's a reason I say that. It's not to deny the name, but it's that, again, I think people tend to attach a lot of baggage to this stuff,
Right.
and a fair amount of ego and narrative through history. And while I think it's very valuable to know who you're speaking with, I trust the guides that work with me because I've been working with them for a while, and there's an incredible consistency in language and intent. They don't teach in fear. They don't teach us that we're special. They don't go that route. They don't care if we get a bigger television set for the living room. That's not really how they're operating. They're really here to support us in our own evolution in consciousness.
You know, in the first book, they talk about how they're bringing us in tune with our own Christed frequency, Christ itself. In the second book, I noticed that they said you may substitute the word creative self, because in the first book, and I had it in my own family and friends that I would give the book to, they got stopped by the term Christ itself because it probably had a lot of Christian baggage associated with it. Is that why they changed it?
Yeah, I know that's why they changed it.
Yeah.
But you know what? They used it in the second book for a bit, and I barely heard it since. You know, I don't hear the word creative self. They use true self now very often. True self or infinite self. They'll give the whole list. You know, or if you will, they'll say something like, or if you wish, the Christ itself, the eternal self, the true self.
The higher self.
They don't use,
self.
essentially, they don't use higher self much. I think when they're speaking of true self, they're actually speaking of, and I could be wrong here, but their definition of the Christ, and this is a definition that they use, is the aspect of the Creator that can be what's the word, known, revealed, expressed in material form as who and what you are. It's the seed of the divine that's present in everyone and everything. And, you know, I think that is a little different than how people think of the soul, and my soul knows more. The soul, I do believe, is evolving through lives and through experiences. But this aspect of us, the infinite self, while it may also be progressing, they say always knows who it is. So the seed of the divine within us is seeking its own expression as and through us. And that is what they said in the first book, and it's still what they're talking about, but they're talking about the realization of the divine in manifestation and form as who and what we truly are.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm getting excited to invite the guides in
Yes.
if that's a possibility.
Do you think they would be interested in or would be willing to?
Well, I think if you want to ask a question, you can find out. But what they have said, and I've got to preface this. I once did a book signing, you know, in Asheville, North Carolina, and some guy in the back row, this poor guy, raised his hand and said, "Can the guides say anything?" And they came right through and said, "We are not the entertainment." And that was it. And they didn't say a thing for the rest of the night. We are not the entertainment. But what he was looking for was the dog and pony show. And they're there to teach.
And the guides knew that.
I think they certainly did. You know, because mostly they'll show up when they're asked. They'll often come through. I just watched some footage of an interview that I gave, and when often somebody will ask me a question and I can't answer it, like I don't know what the hell the answer is, they'll just come through and take it. And so I would say if you want to ask a question, we'll see what we get. What I would say though, for those of you who've never seen me channel, is that when I channel, I whisper the words as they come and repeat them. People hear things twice. It's not very graceful. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great.
Well, thank you. And be rest assured, this is not for entertainment purposes.
I'm not worried about you guys, believe me.
For an awakening.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay, I'd like to begin then with the guides and ask and say that you make a strong distinction between the divine self and the small self, or the higher, not the higher self, but the Christ itself and the small self. Could you share the distinction for us?
There's a true self that's always present. They're saying there's a true self that's always present. The divine is what you are. The divine as what you are, the expression of the divine self, the expression of the divine self in your life is always present, must be aligned to, but must be aligned to the small self that we teach. The small self that we teach, the structure of personality, the structure of personality is amassed through data, and experience. I know I like the color blue. I know I like the color blue because my mother said it looked nice in blue, because my mother said I look nice in blue. I know that's the kind of man I should marry. I know that's the kind of man I should marry, because who would not want to marry that kind of man? Because who would not want to marry that kind of man? You perceive yourselves as independent, but in fact the personality structure, but in fact the personality structure is in many ways an agreement, is in many ways an agreement to the histories you've known yourselves through, the true self, we would say. The true self, we would say, does not abide in history, it does not require it to know itself, and does not require it to know itself. As you align to the truth of what you are, as you align to the truth of who and what you are, you begin to manifest. You begin to manifest in the higher octave that the true self exists in, period. And they're saying period.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I know that you've mentioned, and the guides have mentioned, about the action of fear.
Yeah.
It tends to create more fear.
Yeah.
How can we deal with fear effectively?
Stop agreeing to it. Stop agreeing to it. You just answer the question yourself. You just answer the question yourself. The action of fear. The action of fear is to claim more fear, When you make a choice in fear, you get more of what you wanted. You get more of what you've wanted through that choice, Stop agreeing to it. Stop agreeing to it. Stop claiming it. Stop deciding through it. Stop deciding through it. Say this, yes. You're saying to me, say this, yes. So here's one of the examples they use. They say, everything in our lives we're agreeing to. I agree that you're sitting across the table from me right now. I agree that there are other people in the room. I agree what a lamp is. I agree what a table is. We're all in this sort of collective agreement about what is. Now, and that includes the things that I say I don't want. Like, I agree that there's a war in the Middle East. I didn't create it, but by nature of my seeing it, I have a relationship to it, which is their way of saying energetic accord or agreement. They say everything you agree with, you're shaking hands with. Everything you're shaking hands with, you hold. What you hold, you're in alignment to. If you don't like what you're getting, stop agreeing to it, because then you can claim something other, which means let go of the hand. So one of the things the guides say in almost every workshop is look at your life, look at the last choice you made in fear, and see what it got you, and more than likely you'll see that you probably got more of the same.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So given our current leadership in the White House and everything that's going on the planet today, could you please address that for us?
Well, they don't do political readings, so I don't think they're going to give you what you want. They may talk about the world.
The world. Whatever they might have to say about that.
They're saying we have a lot to say, but you're not going to want to hear it. But you're not going to want to hear it. You don't want to know. You don't want to know that you're complicit in everything, that you are complicit in everything. Everything you see, that you have agreed to, your consciousness is forming. Your consciousness is informing when you elect someone. When you elect someone to an office, you are deciding together. You are deciding together what a relationship will be. If you don't like what you've claimed, if you don't like what you have claimed, claim something higher. What you damn damns you back. What you damn damns you back. What you put in darkness has great power, and calls you to the darkness with it, and calls you to the darkness with it. If you want something new, the first thing you must do is claim the potential of it, Everything exists in multiple octaves, including the ideas of leadership, and government, that you have inherited collectively, You don't like the man in office. If you don't like the man in office, perhaps that is an indicator. Perhaps that is an indicator of a requirement for change, not only in the country, but leadership as, but in what you know leadership as. The possibilities of what may be known by you all, when you break away from what you've known, are quite enormous, but you can't imagine them yet. When you're in transformation, individually and collectively, you have the obligation. To release what no longer serves you, What most of you do do instead is try to reclaim what you've known, is try to reclaim what you have known and make it better and make it better, as opposed to claiming a possibility, as opposed to claiming the new possibility that may be known to you, that may be known to you with the possibility of it, through the possibility of it. What we are telling you actually is that you're all informing what you have, is that you are all informing what you have and how you perceive anything and how you perceive anything at all, what you claim a thing is, what you claim a thing is, decides what that thing is, decides what that thing is in your relationship to it, if you're claiming what you don't want. If you are claiming what you don't want, you are getting what you expect. You are getting what you expect. It's time to change your mind. And it is time to change your mind. Period.
That's great.
Thank you.
That is beautiful.
I hope that made sense.
Yes,
Yes.
totally.
Right.
So we are literally deliberate creators of our reality, whether we're, whatever we're saying.
Well, yes, I think that they say it differently. They don't say, I don't know if they say that we're creators of a reality. They're saying that we're confirming a reality through the consciousness we hold. If I tell you that this glass is worth $5 million, and I have made up some slip of paper to prove that, suddenly this glass has great value. And you're all going to agree to we all agree to what's valuable because we've been taught to believe that. Mm-hmm. If my choice is to decide that someone or something is bad, I'm confirming the very thing that I say I don't want. And I can't transform something through that. Do you understand? I was a classroom teacher for many, many years. And one of the things you realize when you're a teacher is you don't teach somebody by affirming their stupidity. That's the worst thing you can possibly do. But you might get a student who was told that through some bad parenting or through some bad education. Mm-hmm. The obligation of the teacher is to see the potential in the student that can be realized. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that we do that to a politician. It is an example in how we can change our mind to transform our relationship. Because whatever we're deciding upon, we are actually influencing or informing through the consciousness we hold. The collective is now doing this. We don't think, you see, the problem with the New Age sometimes, I think, is that it becomes very small and selfish. I created this, I made that. We're looking at collective agreements now at a global level. This whole idea, the guys that I work with say this, they say, your belief in your separation from your creator, which is not true, they say, or whatever you want to call the creator, your belief that you are separate has actually manifested now in our belief that we're separate from one another, which is also not true.
Right.
And so we're living in a world that's seeking to confirm separation, whether it be building a wall or keeping these people away or those terrible people over there. And each time we do that, we're reinforcing the very thing we say we don't want. The guys that I work with say, we're the only species or people, I don't know what the word was, they said that, you've created bombs to keep yourself safe. They say if you look at the lunacy of that, it makes no sense. But they also say if you think that one day these things are not going to go off, you're crazy because that's what they were built for. Right. So we really and they say because you've lived in a plane for so very long with war, you expect it. And because you expect it, you keep replicating again what you say you don't want. So the level of consciousness they say that is needed to transform this is a level of consciousness that no longer agrees to war. Do you understand that?
Exactly.
That's how things really change.
Yeah.
Other than that, we're still fighting up against stuff.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like if we really were to encapsulate it, this notion of God or creator, source, whatever we call this thing, ultimately, it's ever present.
Yeah.
And it's in all things, period. Period.
That's what they say. God, this is not a new concept.
No.
If you know the 12 steps, there's a line in the literature there. It says, God is everything or God is nothing. What's our choice to be? So if God is only in the people that I like or the things that I agree with, I'm going to have a very skewered relationship with the concept. And a very divisive one. one of the things the guides have been saying a lot lately, because they're talking about the divinity that is inherent in form now, and they say we can't really transform the material world until we realize that even the form that we have taken is divine, because what we've grown up with, most of us, is the idea that God is up in the clouds and we're here in the mud, in lower vibration. But they say, you know, God is in the clouds, but God is the mud as well.
Yes.
Which means it's also, you know, the hair on your arm and the eyes in your head and in your breath and in the tree and in that person across the way that you just can't stand. You see what I mean? It's still got to be there. And so when we start to move to that, and the guides call it the kingdom, the guides define the kingdom as the awareness of the divinity in all manifestation. Then they say the true self is who enters that consciousness or that vibratory accord. The small self really can't, because the small self is still completely invested in the idea of separation in order to survive.
Right.
And you call that out in the title of the book, right? Because I am the Word, where the Word is defined as the vibration of God in action. And if I am that, and we are all that, then God is ever present in us, in whatever vibration we're in.
That's what they say.
Everything. I'd like to ask you a question that was actually submitted by one of our audience members, and I'm just going to read it because these are her words. The guides say that each person has free will to make their own choices, and we do not have the right to make choices for another person or take away their free will choice. I get that. But what about a situation where a person has a mental illness or dementia, and his safety and well-being, as well as the safety and well-being of others, could be compromised because he no longer has enough brain function to have the understanding or judgment to be able to make his own choices? How far can a caregiver go in making choices for a person with a mental disability?
I hear as required, yes, say this. They're saying yes, say this. So I don't know if they've talked about mental disability in their teachings. They've done it a lot in live streams and in lectures, because they're talking to people all the time who have family members who are suffering with some of these things. But the guides are very specific about children and how your obligation is to care for your child, and your child shouldn't, you know, I mean, basically, if your child wants to stay out until 5 in the morning and he's 10 years old, that's not something you permit. It doesn't make any sense. You know, your job is to be in care of until that child is in a position to care for themselves. Now, I'll see if they want to say anything about this in a way. We would like to. Stop making yourself quite so important. Stop making yourself quite so important. You have an obligation to another. You have another obligation to another when you agree to that. When you agree to that, and that is an agreement that's made. And that is an agreement that is made. It requires care. If somebody requires your care, and you choose to be in this position, and you choose to be in this position to support them this way, to support them in this way, you are claiming inheritance. You are claiming an inheritance, and the ability to support somebody else, in a high way, in a high way. The thinking that you do it all yourself, that you do it all yourself, is where you become frightened, Do you have permission? Do you have permission to care for someone who can't care for himself, to care for someone who can't care for themselves? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. In fact, that is a high choice. Why would it be anything else? Why would it be anything else? Period. So they say period. You know, I mean, they've said it a lot. You know, we are our brother's keeper. And if that's something that's required, now I think there's a distinction here, which is, I don't like what so-and-so is doing, so I'm going to make sure they do what I want. And the fact is that we have people with free will, and they're going to choose what they want to choose. I don't think they're talking about mental illness here, you know, or disability. But I also think that we would like to choose. Sometimes we think we're supposed to be fixing people, but I've met people who are trying to use this work to fix other people, and it doesn't work that way. To know the truth of who someone is, the divine self, or to realize them in a higher way, is a gift and will support and help them. That doesn't mean they're going to do what you want.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Okay. So to follow up on that point, another thing that the guides, and you have said before, is you cannot be the light and hold another in darkness.
Yep.
So if somebody is doing something that feels like it's opposite or antithetical to something that's love and life affirming, how does one navigate that?
You know who they are anyway. You know who they are anyway. I mean, I'm not going to get this quote right, so I probably shouldn't even. I'm getting a, yeah, you probably shouldn't, so I won't. I was going to try to quote from a book, and if I misquote the book. But, murder is not a holy act, but the murderer is still holy.
Right.
Do you understand? And you can't deny the divine in anyone.
Right.
To deny the divine in anyone is to deny it in yourself. There's an exercise that the guides use in the Book of Mastery. And they say, okay, now there's a cave, and you're going to go in that cave, and in that cave is the one person you never want to see again as long as you live.
I've done that exercise.
Well, the exercise is to lead that person out of the cave and back to the light. And they say, well, you have to do that because you put them there. You're the one that put them in the darkness, and they called you right there with them. And so the idea of forgiveness, which I think can be a teaching that's misunderstood, we're not forgiving people because we're nice. What we're doing is we're releasing people so that we can also have our freedom, and the idea, it's a very simple teaching. You can't be the light and hold another in darkness.
Right.
Because when you do that, you go right into the dark with them.
Right.
So that's the reason you release them. One of the things the guides have been saying, I don't think it's in a book yet, it might be, because I've only been hearing this a lot in the last 8 months or so, and the next round of dictation is going to start up shortly. But they say, we have to forgive other people for not being who we wanted them to be.
Right.
Because most of the problem is not what they did, it's that they did what they did, we didn't want them to do. So I didn't want this person to betray me. But in fact, I didn't want this person to be the kind of person who could do this. Do you understand? If I release this person from being who I want him or her to be, I'm actually off the hook too. Doesn't mean I like what they did. Do you understand that? Yes. Okay.
I did that exercise, and when I read that, as you lead them out of the cave, know that you're being lifted and that they're your teacher. And I went,
oh, that's right. That is
yeah,
in there.
my goodness, that they're your teacher.
They are your teacher.
Yeah, and I've had some perfect teachers. I have one more question. Our time is flying, but I think everyone comes up against this situation where they're working on something to bring into their lives, wording something, word through my ideal life partner, through shifting my financial circumstances, through my health of my body or whatever. And they're doing the work diligently and diligently and diligently, but it is not happening. And what are we doing wrong here?
Well, what they added to it is not happening. They just added as you think it should.
Oh, as okay.
And that's the issue. As you think you should be.
Right.
As you think you should be, and as you think you should be may not be what you require. And as you think you should be might not be what you require. You're learning through all experience. You are learning through all experience. You must realize yourselves. You must realize yourselves as you are, and all things may be called to you, and all things may be called to you through the true self, who knows what she requires, who knows what she requires. The small self wants this or that. The small self wants this or that to confirm what she thinks she should be, to confirm what she thinks she should be. The true self knows what she requires. The true self knows what she requires and calls it into manifestation quite readily, period.
Okay.
Period.
Thank you.
I have the same stuff, so I get it. I like the answer. Okay.
Exactly. And I think on Saturday you said that profound statement of forgiving the person, that maybe you're in some type of altercation with, for being the person that,
For not
being the person that you want them to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think really important.
It helps. That one helps me a lot.
That one helps me a lot too. Yeah, great, good. Well,
Do you have any pearls of wisdom that you'd like to leave our audience with in terms of one or two?
You asking Paul or the guides?
Whoever wants to answer.
Yeah, I don't have anything to do with, so I'm going to tell you that. I'm going to see if they want to say something. Only one thing. Stop trying so hard. Stop trying so hard. You're all trying so hard. You're all trying so hard to become spiritual. You're already spiritual. You are already spiritual. Aligned to the spirituality. Aligned to the spirituality is the truth of your being. That is the truth of your being. And let it be expressed as you, and let it be expressed as you. It does not try, it does not try, it lets, it allows, it agrees, it agrees. It does not push the mountain, it does not push the mountain, it is with the mountain, it is with the mountain, it's lifting, period, period, period,
Oh,
period, period,
wow.
period.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to the guides and to
Yes,
you.
you're welcome,
Yeah.
Paul.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks
It
for
was
having me.
Wonderful, yes. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the next segment of the show, which is Stu's Views. And frankly, I can't wait to hear what he has to say about this show.
And the good news is you don't have to, because
Okay,
here we go.
Here we go.
Okay, Stu's Views this time around is more of a Stu's to-dos. Because, I did introduce the book, I Am the Word, that Paul wrote, or channeled, to Patricia. And I've been working with it myself. In fact, one of my to-dos is, before I get out of bed in the morning, with my eyes still closed, the first thing I go to is, I am, and I define the word as it is defined in the book, as I am the vibration of God in action. I am the vibration of God in action. And I ask to allow for this creator who's imagining me and all of existence to have some fun with its existence and its creation of me, of us, whoever we are, and to ask for grace in the unfolding, because there are so many moments of awkwardness, and so many moments of tenderness, and so many moments of self-judgment, which, as we all have them, they don't always feel so good. And in those moments of self-judgment, it's invariable how I am not in the alignment and in that connection with this source, with God, Spirit, whatever it's called. And so I'm really inviting in, especially as the guides, as Paul has channeled them, invites us into a vibrational presence, a certain radio signal that can be most delightful if we really are in a divine consciousness, a divine setting where we feel we are every bit connected with everything. And it's such a great gift to actually be in this life form. Of all the possible life forms that we get to be in, or of possibility of all creation, this one seems to be, have some benefit to it. So why not have it be as joyful and celebratory and playful as it could possibly be? And so I'm really inviting you all to develop a practice yourself. As I have a Stu's to do, I'm inviting you to a to do. And that is to work with the consciousness that we are connected to that which is inherently infinite, whatever name you want to ascribe to it, that we are aspects of it, we are inseparable from it, no matter how many thoughts we have to the contrary. And in feeling that, I think we all become transmissionaries. We become transmissionaries of a light, of a vibration. It feels so good. We see that in each other. We uplift each other. And as rumor has it that this thing is infinite, so are our possibilities of what we can have in life. And so I'm really inviting in the infinite joy of possibility that we are just scratching the surface of. And with that, that's the to-do, that's Stu, and here's Patricia with Quantum Quote.
I love your wit. I love your wit.
Thank you, Stu.
Great. So, given the magnitude of this work, it was only the most natural thing in the world for me to do to select a quote from one of the 5 books, and I've read them all, and I have loved them all. And there's so many, a plethora of quotes I could have chosen in any of the books, and I went through them all, and one just kept coming back. And it's the same one, it's mentioned in every single one of the books. And that is, I know who I am in truth. I know what I am in truth. I know how I serve in truth. And in truth was added now with the 5th book, which is the Book of Truth. Prior to that, it was without those 2 words at the end. And how I personally would define those 3 statements are like this. I know who I am in truth. I'm an embodiment of the divine in physical form. I know what I am in truth. I'm an energy being vibrating at a frequency that allows me to be manifested in human form. And I know how I serve in truth. Now this one we would think, how I serve. Well, I could be a missionary, or I could be a healer, or I could be a teacher, I could be this, that, or the other thing that's making my contribution to humanity. But this is not how the guides interpret, I know how I serve. How we serve is by seeing everyone else on the planet as the same, as an embodiment of the divine. Everyone as God in form. And in the 5th book is the first time, and I may be wrong, but it's the first time that I saw in print, in fact, you are God in form. And that was just touched me very deeply. And of course they went immediately to say, and everybody is, so don't think that you're special. So how can we practically apply this to our lives? You know, let's look at the political scene. You know, I, for one, have judged the White House and the whole Trump and all his cohorts very harshly, and feeling very justified in doing that, given what's going on in the planet. But that doesn't help, because what it does is it creates more fear, and it keeps them there. So what I think that would be so important if we could do this is to rise above it. There are going to be people that are carrying placards and going to town halls and expressing their dissatisfaction with what's going on in the government today. But something that's so much more powerful than that would be for us to hold them in forgiveness and compassion and love, because they're all God in the body. The distinction is the level of awareness. All of us that are in this conversation have a higher level of awareness than Trump and his cohorts, which don't seem to have any level of awareness. But as we do this, we lift them up. We lift them up, and it's the most generous gift that we can do to see the so-called villains on the planet as divine beings that are here doing whatever they're doing. So I invite all of you to try this, because I think that when we build a resonant field of this conversation on the planet, we can look at eventually everyone on the planet being in this conversation. We will have the possibility of heaven on earth, and I hope I see it in my lifetime. So, to close the show, I just want to say that we are the ones that we've been waiting for. So let's not hesitate any longer and really put it out there and hold everyone, everyone, everyone before us as divine. We are here, we are here, we are here.
Beautiful.
So this was my favorite show. And we close the show every time by holding hands. And if everyone would take the hand of their neighbor, please. And we're all going to say this together. Until next time, get conscious now. Okay? And we're all going to, Paul, you're going to look into that camera over there. And so
I'm going to look over here.
Yes, all right.
Okay.
So we should, ready?
Yep.
All right. Until next time,
get conscious now. Yeah, that was good.
Hi, I'm Melissa Ray of Thrive Beauty Services. I provide transformational beauty services in salon, at home, on site, and at your convenience. I'm proud to be sponsoring Get Conscious Now.